Good afternoon. My name is Claude Stern. Happy Hanukkah. I'm a proud Z3 committee organizer, and I'm delighted to be here today at this event hosted by the Oshman Family JCC and the Riot Group. As you heard from Zach Bodner at the plenary session opening, this is going to be an exciting conference where we're talking about ultimately the interaction between world Jewry and Israeli Jewry. Before we get started with the session, a couple of things. Number one, please silence your cell phones. If they're not off, turn them off now, please. There will be no Q&A at this session. The speakers will be occupying the entire time, and this session should probably end promptly at about 1:25. Now let's talk about what the program's about. The program, in case you're wondering, make sure you haven't wandered into the wrong room. This is the butterfly effect, Israel's nation-state law and world Jewry. As many of you know, on July 18th of this year, by a vote of 62 to 55, Israel's Knesset passed Israel's nation-state law. I think it is fair to say that the passage of that law was met with an uproar and great controversy across the Jewish world. Questions posed were, did that law simply state explicitly what was already a reality, or did that law betray long-held Zionist values and views? Today's panel discussion is going to be reviewing the Basic Law against the backdrop of the country's founding documents, including the Declaration of Independence, and discusses the place of world Jewry with respect to the 21st century and the implementation and interpretation of Israel's nation-state law. We have an absolutely blue-chip panel to address this topic today. First and foremost, it's my great pleasure to introduce Ambassador Daniel Shapiro, the former United States Ambassador to Israel under President Obama. Ambassador Shapiro, before he was ambassador, was a senior director for the Middle East and North Africa at the United States National Security Council. Our next speaker will be Ariel Kahana, who is the diplomatic correspondent for Israel's largest Hebrew-speaking newspaper, Israel Hayom. Our third speaker will be Shay Piron, who's the chairman of the Prima movement in Israel and former dean and vice president of the Ono American College, which is one of the fastest growing colleges in Israel, a college which is devoted to pluralism and using education to promote social integration within Israel. And finally, it is my great pleasure to introduce to you the moderator for the panel, Chemi Shalev, and as a devoted Haaretz reader, I read Chemi many times a week. He is the U.S. editor and senior columnist and U.S. analyst for Haaretz. He also publishes an English language blog called West of Eden, which addresses relationships between U.S. Jewry and Israeli Jewry, and he was previously a diplomatic correspondent and a journalist for the Jerusalem Post, Devar, and Ma'ariv. It is with my great pleasure that I produce to you the panel and leave it to Chemi to lead the panel's discussion.
I was asked to participate in a panel on the nation-state law, and I readily agreed. And then I was surprised to find that I'm supposed to moderate it and not just participate, which I thought was an interesting choice, given that my positions on the nation-state law are quite unequivocal, and I was against the nation-state law. And if you'll pardon me talking about myself, the first thing that came into my mind because I knew the conference was being held here, was to find something parallel to me moderating this session. And I have to tell you that I used to live in Los Angeles when I was a child, and I was a big Dodger fan. And the first thing that, I'm not making this up, first thing that crept into my mind was that that's like asking Juan Marichal to moderate a debate about Sandy Koufax. That's for the older people. Or maybe Bibi about the New Israel Fund, or...
You're really dating yourself, Chemi.
Or Donald Trump about honesty and decency in the White House. So I'm going to try to divide the discussion into two parts. The first will deal with the nation-state law and the debate that swirled around it in Israel and whether it was necessary or not, and the second about the impact that the nation-state law and other laws may have had or had on world Jewry and especially on American Jews. And I'm going to now abuse my position as moderator to talk about the second part for just 1 second, and that is that I think that the nation-state law is a line in the sand that divides before and after. Not so much because of its content, but more because of its timing and because the way it was perceived. I think that if the law would have been passed by a different government and in other times, and despite its deficiencies, it would not have created such a stir. But given that it was passed a few months ago by a government that was already suspect in the eyes of many people in the world and many American Jews, it was perceived as a declaration of defiance by the Israeli government, and it estranged, I think, American Jews, even though it did not directly impact them. But I will now, just for 1 second, I will reserve that because Jerry Silverstein, the executive director of the Jewish Federations of North America, came to Israel a week before the law was passed. And initially, his objections were to the clauses in the, or at least this is what was made public, were to the clauses in the law that have to do with diaspora Jewry. And he objected to them, and I think rightly so. But he was nonetheless criticized by Israeli journalists, and including by myself. Why are you dealing with these clauses that have to do with diaspora Jews when you should have much larger issues with the other parts of the law that have to do with Israel itself? But I think in retrospect, and he changed his public posture, and he started talking more about the Israeli aspects of the law. But I think that in retrospect, I think I owe him an apology, because I think that he was right to focus on the impact of the law on American Jews, and the fact that the clauses in the law, in fact, they were condescending towards diaspora Jews in general. As Israel, as the great protector of diaspora Jews exist mainly as potential victims of anti-Semitism, and there was no appreciation or recognition of the fact that diaspora Jews are an entity unto themselves, perhaps, if not equal to Israel, then at least one worthy of merit. So to help us with our, they've been introduced. But first of all, I have to say, Dan told me that he's a fan of the Chicago Cubs. He must still be celebrating from 2006.
The rest of my life.
And I'd like to thank Ariel Kahana. Ariel Kahana, we asked him to join this panel just half an hour before it convened because a member of the Knesset, Sharon Haskel of the Likud, who was supposed to come, couldn't come because all the members of the Knesset are now under quarantine in Israel because the government has a 61 majority, and it doesn't allow members to leave the country because then they might be ambushed by the opposition. And
so must pay me for the political crisis. You know.
So we have to. I want to apologize for the fact my daughter, all my daughters actually, would kill me if they knew that I was on a panel which had 4 men and no women. So I apologize in advance for that. And
correct.
And I'll try to play the role of the woman.
But I have 5 grandchildren, so it's okay. Not 4 daughters.
Okay. So Dan, let's start with you. Looking back at it now, was the protest and the controversy over the law, was it justified? Or when we look back, maybe it was just an isolated incident which has no lasting effects?
Well, I think a lot of the debate around the nation-state law at the time it passed was rather overheated in both sides. You know, it wasn't something that was absolutely required and necessary to maintain Israel's status as a Jewish state. The proponents of it wildly oversold its import, its necessity, what it accomplished, whether it was needed at all. I also think it is not the death knell of Israeli democracy. And those who came to criticize it, I think at times got overheated in their rhetoric as well. It's also quite watered down from earlier versions of it. The same law has been kicking around in the Knesset for several years, including in the previous government, and it ultimately passed in a much weaker and watered down form from what it originally was. But I think it does raise two fundamental questions. One was, and you alluded to this, was it necessary? And I'm still struggling to understand the argument put forth by its proponents to say that if it had not been for the passage of this basic law, Israel's very status as a Jewish state would somehow be in doubt. That is Israel's status. It has been since its founding. It lives that reality every single day. It's a struggle for me to understand what the argument is. And in fact, the only thing that really seems to threaten Israel's status as a Jewish state or a Jewish and democratic state has to do with something unrelated to this law, which is the question of permanent control over the West Bank and the Palestinian population therein, and how Israel would maintain it. So that's the first question. Why was it necessary? Most likely it was passed in real terms to serve a political purpose involving specific coalition requirements, or a broader political purpose to further the argument that there are some Israelis who are truly committed to Israel's status as a Jewish state and others who are less committed to it, those who ended up opposing the law for one reason or another. So that's the first question. Was it necessary? And I think that was its real purpose. Not necessarily why one should approach things as serious as a basic law, which is quasi-constitutional status in Israel. The second question is, what damage did it cause? And again, I think it's certainly possible to overstate, and we shouldn't, that this was the end of Israeli democracy or anything along those lines. But it does touch that delicate balance of Israel's status as both a Jewish state with all of the symbols and all of the meaning and import of its Jewish identity and the way it conducts its affairs, and a state that is deeply proud of and welcoming to and seeking to integrate its minority populations as full and equal citizens. Of course, that is the reality of those populations. But if one wants to make sure that remains a critical part of Israel's identity, it's a question: why would one change the status of the Arabic language? Why would one not include the other clauses from the Declaration of Independence that talk about equal status for non-Jewish citizens? And the evidence, of course, of the impact of that is not what people outside of Israel said, although we can get to that. It's what people inside Israel said. It's what a deeply loyal minority, like the Druze population that serves in the IDF and in the other security services and bleeds for Israel, felt deeply wounded and anguished by this. It was that people like President Rivlin, who has spoken broadly about the importance of Israel's democratic identity and the integrating the four tribes of Israeli society together, and IDF commanders who have served with Druze soldiers, felt that this somehow was doing disservice to another critical element of Israel's identity. So again, then that reverberates, and we'll get to this maybe in the second part, that reverberates in how the law is viewed on the outside by people who come at this question deeply committed to Israel's Jewish character and with maybe equal value, deeply proud of and wanting to see the continuation of Israel's democratic character.
Shay. Shay was also a Minister of Education. I'm not sure that was mentioned in the
It's
introduction.
more important than honor college, but maybe.
And correct me if I'm wrong, I think you supported the law when it was being, the law took 7 years of legislation and you were involved in some of them. And so I think you were supportive of some versions of the law, and then you withdrew your support mainly in connection with the minorities. So tell us, what is your view?
You know, first of all, it's more important to talk like a former minister who sat in the cabinet and with the Western Wall and all the problems in the last government. And more important for me to talk like a rabbi of a small town in Israel. from the Orthodox community, and I think that nobody talk about the problems. The problems, now in this 2 or 3, next Saturday, we finish to read Genesis, Chumash Bereshit. And the issue of Bereshit is only stories. As Jews, we know all the time what's mitzvot we have to do. And now we have the first book in the Bible, it's only with stories, because people need stories. When Martin Luther King came, he never say we are in the Silicon Valley, he never say I have a plan. He say I have a dream. And the big problem is that in my country, everybody talk about fear, about survived. A lot of people think that we need Israel because our grandfather and grandmother came from the Holocaust. A lot of people look to the past and not to the futures. And the big question is, what is the story of Israel? For me, this law, it's a bad option to write our story. Someone think that he wants to write the Jewish story, the story of my country, and he take this law, and they think that it can be our Genesis, our story. And it's a very bad story, because democracy is not skills. And equal, it's the pure Judaism for me, as a rabbi. And I know that word like equal is not in the law, not because we have a problem with the Arabs. It came because the ultra-Orthodox understand that if we wrote equal in the law, reform and conservative can be with a lot of dreams to build community in Israel. So I think that the story of this situation is who will write the new story of the Jewish people. Now, for me, we have 2 options, or brotherhood or values. In the past, when Ben-Gurion and Begin in 48, everybody was in another place. But when Begin think about values of brotherhood, he said brotherhood, and he closed Etzel and Lehi and all the story with Antenna. And Ben-Gurion, in the other side, think about the same problem, and he say brotherhood most important than value, so he take the Palmach and he change all the situation because he understands that brotherhood is more important than value. And today, right, left, never mind. Everybody think that value is more important than brotherhood. That's the dangers. And for me, it became because we are not came from the Judaism culture, we came from the Catholic cultures. Because look at the Sfaradim, look at the Mesoratim, a tradition. They believe that nobody stay alone. Look at our table in Leil Seder. All the 4 brothers sit together in the same tables. Because Judaism is not to say right, wrong, in the home, out of the home. Judaism is to be together. And this law, for me, it's tragedy. Because nobody wrote story with 61 MKs. Nobody wrote story with 61 MKs. In our 17 years birthday, it can be a wonderful situation to write together a new story to our nations. We lost the chance.
Ariel, first of all, I'm relying on you to get my blood pressure going. So. One, perhaps you'll be able to answer Dan. One, why was it necessary? Most of what is written in the law is, not all, is stating the obvious. Israel is the historic homeland. The flag is blue and white. The anthem is a tikva. The motto is chutzpah. No, they didn't put So why was it necessary, and was it not actually a political ploy in which the government, in order to make this division that Dan spoke about, to classify the people who opposed the law as somehow being less loyal than the others, or maybe you believe that Netanyahu's explanation is right, that Israel's place as a Jewish state is being delegitimized, and we needed a strong assertion of Israel's Jewish identity. And I'd like also to ask you what is your explanation for the fact that democracy was not included, and for the fact that the Arabs and the Druze were completely ignored?
Well, many questions. So first of all, I want to say thank you for inviting me to this conference. Following up to what was said in the former panel, I am moved from coming here from the other side of the globe and hearing the voices that yes, we are one mishpuche, we are one nation, we are one people, we are obligated one to each other, the Jews in Israel, the Jews here. It's not obvious. As we know, not all Jews, wherever they live, feel obligated to the continuity of the Jewish people. So for me to know that I understood 1,000 people came here, bought tickets, and to join this conference, for me it is meaningful. So that's the background for me. Now, I'm not a Knesset member, so I do not intend to represent...
Who knows?
For now. I do not intend to represent the government or to replace a Knesset member who didn't came. I can tell you, Chemi, about myself. As a young journalist, I believe maybe 20 years ago, we had an opportunity to meet Aaron Barak, who was a chief judge of the High Court. And he wanted to hear from religious journalists what is their opinion about his decisions, his policies, and so on. And when my turn came, I told him that he's going in his judicial way. He's going in a way that, at least the way I saw it then and still see it today, is a way that doesn't represent the majority of the Jewish people who live in Israel. That time, maybe the main decision by Barak was what we call as the Bagatz Katzir, which was actually a decision that practically, more or less, and I'm simplifying a complicated resolution, but more or less it said that practically Jewish villages cannot keep themselves as so, and they do have to accept inside Arab citizens, while practically we know that Arab cities, Arab villages do not accept Jewish to their places. Now, it is a very complicated issue.
Not in law.
It touches, sorry?
Not in law.
Not in law, I said practically.
It's not the same.
I said practically.
Okay, it's not the same.
I agree. I said practically, and I want to say it's a sensitive, complicated issue, and I'm not the one to try now to solve it in a simple way. But I think the way Barak went, and we're talking about maybe 20 years ago, maybe more, didn't represent the majority of the people of Israel. And if you ask me, Chemi, that maybe the nation law, maybe it was born there. Now, the process, as was mentioned before, took many years. If I'm not wrong, it was born or began by Knesset member Avi Dichter, supported by Tzipi Livni at that time, by the Kadima party, which, let's say, is a center, maybe center-right, maybe center, but at least center party. It was supported by Knesset member from the Avodah, from the Labor. Okay?
But with democracy.
Okay,
I have here all the
it had, yeah, but the need,
and with equal.
The question, if we need such a law, let's say more or less it was in the consensus that we do need it, okay? That was the beginning. Now, for many years, there were many discussions, many changes, many argues. As Dan said before, the last version that was approved is not the toughest one that went through the process. Okay, and by the way, I'm not here to protect the decision as it was or the law as it was. I'm not an expert for it, but I think it was while there was wide consensus in Israel that there is a need for such a law. And another reason for that is that and again, it's another process that during the last years, Israel is going to, let's say, a much more legalized process. Okay, maybe many years ago we could say, okay, we have the Declaration of Independence, Megillat Ha'atzmaut, and that's good enough for us. But what is going on in the last years is that if you don't have it as printed law by the Knesset, so the legal advisor will tell you, no, I can't protect it. I want to see it as a law. So because everything became legalized, there was a need to say the obvious things like the flag and so on by a law. So I would say that is the background and the explanation why this law was, and in my view, was and still is needed. I must say that I was surprised and in some way even offended by the reaction from the Jewish federations. First of all, this law, and I was so glad for that, declared for the first time about the obligation of the Jewish state to the Jewish diaspora. So instead of appreciating it, that for the first time it is said in a basic law of the state of Israel, not only did they not support it, they attack it. And the other reason they attacked it is that as if the democratic state of Israel do not take care of minorities. Now, with all due respect, in my view, it's not the job of the Jewish federations to preach the state of Israel whether we keep our democratic values or not. If you want to learn the Israeli system, if you want to see if we take care about equality to all minorities, so go to see the High Court's decisions. Go to see the basic law of dignity and freedom to each person, and of course, go to see the declaration, the independence of declaration. So, for me, as I said, it was, in my view, they shouldn't react to that laws as the federations the way they did. And maybe, and I would say in as gentle as I can, I do feel from time to time that Jewish people out of Israel, I would say, do not respect the democratic process in Israel as it is. I don't like all the decisions that are made by the government. I don't like all the decisions that are made by the chief rabbis. But I understand that's the process. That's democracy. That's the way we live together. I will tell you maybe a kind of personal example. I was learning in yeshiva by Rabbi Chaim Druckmann, a very known rabbi in the national religious movement in Israel. And during the years, Rabbi Druckmann made, I believe, thousands of giurim, of conversions. And then one day, a Haredi rabbi decided to cancel thousands of conversions, Rabbi Druckmann made.
Orthodox conversion.
Yeah, completely Orthodox rabbi. Now, it drive me, and I wasn't the only one, drive me crazy. How dare you to do it? But that's a process. And by the way, this decision was canceled again, but we have no other way to live together, first by democracy, and secondly by respect each other, although we disagree. And I'm saying that because the nation bill is only one issue, and I know, and I would even say I feel the pain, whether it's the Kotel or other issues. I feel the pain of my brothers and sisters who live here, and I completely understand it. But we must understand that those are the game. That's the democracy game. That's the way it is. That's the rules. That's the way it works. Do I want some things to change? Yes, I do. Of course, I do. But that is, and as it was said before by Tova, if I'm not wrong, whether it's the Likud, or whether it's the Labour, or whether it's Kadima, or Yesh Atid, by the way, the Haredim get the numbers they get. And they are standing for their principles, whether I agree or disagree. That's the game of democracy. And if we want to change it, and some things I do want to change, we have to play by the rules. And so going back to the nation bill, again, for me, when I saw especially the Druze protest, of course I didn't feel good with it. In my view, as Dan hinted, at least in the beginning, all this issue was completely politicized because it was, as I said, the law began in consensus and then it went to a political disagreement. And last point, trying to answer all the questions, I do not think that Netanyahu had intention to put his opponents, his opposition, as are not loyal enough to the Jewish state. Netanyahu tried to approve this bill in the former government as well. As we said, the law was changed during the years and the process and discussions in the Knesset, and that was the outcome. That's the way, at least, that I see it.
Well, I don't want to get into right now into the question of what Jewish federations or American Jews are eligible to criticize and what they're not eligible to criticize. But first of all, I think that if you declare that Israel is the home of the Jewish people, then the Jewish people, those that don't live in Israel, also should have a say. Otherwise, just say that Israel is the home of the Jewish people who happen to live in Israel. You can't appropriate American Jews and then say, but don't talk about the identity that we've decided.
And now it's in the law.
Questions. Everybody has the rights to say. We believe in freedom of speech, but maybe, I remember the text of the declaration, and it was hard. Okay, so maybe they could choose different words. No, whatever. Let's say in a more broad way, as I said before, from time to time, let's say I do wish, as I said before, to more respect to what's going on in Israel, to the outcomes that comes from Israel democracy, whether we like it or not.
Well, but dialogue is one of the things in democracy. Dialogue.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
But democracy can, if a democracy goes bad, it can make bad decisions that can be criticized even by people who are not part. And I'm getting to you in 1 second. And just one more thing. The Jewish federations may or may not have criticized the issue of the minorities, but it was the minorities themselves who testified about their feelings about. I was at the Druze demonstration. It was one of the most moving experiences of my life. And I remember there were thousands of Druze who came to Kikar Rabin in Tel Aviv, and they were joined, and this was the more moving part, by thousands of Tel Avivians who came to support them. But I met somebody there, and he said, it's too late.
It's not too late.
I'm telling you what he said. He said, there's no going back after this. But well, Dan, okay. You have
to respond to
a
couple of the things that have come up. So one reason it may be relevant for Jewish communities abroad to take an interest in Israel's treatment of minorities, and particularly the federations, is because much of the philanthropy of those various organizations, with the strong support of the Israeli government, and by the way, the U.S. Embassy during my time, and I think still, was involved in these efforts too, was focused on issues of trying to improve the integration of minorities into Israeli society, to give them opportunities to move into the high-tech economy, to break down barriers, to create dialogue, a sense of shared society. This is something that we have been told is a good thing, that we have been told we can contribute to, that this is a desirable manifestation of our support for Israel's democracy and its national character. And so to come and then see a law that seems to be doing the opposite, that seems to alienate those same minorities.
Seems to,
well,
or
they felt
doing it?
Well, they felt it. So obviously they felt alienated by it.
But then
and there
you
were
said
words.
before it was politicized. You said it in the beginning.
Yeah.
That from the beginning it should have been so disagreement because it went into political argue. In the beginning it was a consensus.
Well, it could
right?
have probably passed with 80 or 90 votes had the
Okay.
words of equality from the Declaration of Independence been included in it. And I haven't yet heard a clear explanation why they were left out when in fact they were proposed to be added in even in the final days before it passed. So that's on sort of the more technical issues. But back to the question of the way American Jews or outsiders contribute to this debate. Look, anybody who has the right of citizenship or the right to gain citizenship, as any Jew in the world does, and chooses not to exercise it, needs to have a sense of proportion about their ability to raise their voice. No non-Israeli, no Jewish, American, or any other Jew from anywhere in the world has the same right or the same standing as Israeli citizens speaking to their own government in the Israeli democratic process. And we, as American Jews, we as outsiders who have chosen not to become citizens, need to have that sense of proportion and that sense of, I think, modesty about our voice. It doesn't mean we don't have a voice, as was said a moment ago by Shay. Everybody can say whatever they want. You said it too. But, Israeli leaders are going to listen to their voters and their citizens more than they're going to listen to anybody else, like politicians anywhere. So that's fair. On the flip side, the Israeli government, which as Chemi says, defines itself as the nation-state of the Jewish people and does seek to have an identification with it by Jews abroad, by the fellow democracies, and so forth, should at least bear in mind whether its actions and policies and laws how they will be received within the context of the values and the sensitivities of the same people who support it seeks. And this is not only relevant to the nation-state law. I've said to many Israeli audiences, almost any place I give a talk in Israel these days, the first question I get is, are we losing the support of American Jews? Are we losing the support of the young generation? Something like that. Are we losing the support of Democrats? Sometimes they ask me that. And I say, there's some...
who ask it.
Yeah, and they say there's some of it happening at the margins, and there's work to do. And by the way, I wouldn't overstate it, but the major responsibility to address that problem falls on my shoulders. Falls on the shoulders of Jewish community leaders, Democratic Party leaders, non-Orthodox leaders, people like the sponsors of this very conference, to do the education in our own community about Israel's history and the context and the facts that are often twisted in a way and distorted in a way of delegitimizing Israel. And we have that responsibility on our shoulders, and we take it very seriously. Programs like Taglit and many, many others, which are too many to mention. The only thing I ask of my Israeli friends in that process is please don't make it harder for me. And things like a nation-state law that has the effect of alienating, whether it was intended or not, has the effect of alienating Israel's minorities. Things like maybe seeming not committed to trying to preserve the possibility of a two-state solution. Things like policies of the rabbinate, which are then not addressed properly by the government or addressed and then reversed, like the Kotel and the conversion law. These are types of decisions that actually make it harder for people like me, Israel's allies in the non-Orthodox American Jewish community, Israel's allies in the Democratic Party, to do my work, to do the education and ensuring the identification of the next generation of Israelis.
Let's say it's make my life hard as well. So what can we do?
Yeah.
Should we divorce?
No, listen, no, we shouldn't divorce, but absolutely not. But, and listen, Israelis have the right, again, in their democratic system, to rank the priorities.
Right.
If the priority is
So as I said, I don't like
if
the
priority is winning
outcome
this law,
as well. Some of the outcome, I don't like it as well.
but Israelis also should bear the responsibility of,
Right,
of
but
one of
that's
the
what we have.
impacts
You know,
of their decision.
You know,
Ariel, we're going to do this American style, so let them.
I think I've said what last sentence. All I would say is that Israel has every right to rank order the priorities and maybe ensuring or being sensitive to the vulnerabilities and the feelings of of American Jews or diaspora Jews is only 5th or 6th or 7th on that list, and it sometimes gets lost in the shuffle. But it's still a responsibility then Israel has to take for the decisions that it has taken based on other priorities. By the way, I think this is relevant to the Trump era as well. I don't want to get too political about it, but it's relevant to how an Israeli government addresses and works with an American government that is touching a lot of those sensitivities and vulnerabilities that American Jews feel.
Shay, I don't know what you plan to, but I want to add something. You mentioned
No,
that
because Ariel afraid to divorce for
I refuse.
them, but
I
maybe
refuse,
divorce
exactly.
from me.
No, definitely not.
Okay.
no, but I wanted to get into, or to touch, you touched on it before, on the what was, and I'm not sure it is anymore, but what was the most sensitive issue and has been since the state was established, and that is the recognition of Reform and conservative Jews. And we have the controversy surrounding is it possible, and I'm asking you a theological question, is it possible for a government in which there is an Orthodox component to recognize Reform and conservative Jews in any way, shape, or form? And why did that not happen when you were, for example, were Minister of Education?
First of all, before I answer your questions, you know, you are a journalist. It's danger to say it to you, but I promise you that in the next Knesset, they will change this law. Okay? I promise you. And you will see it. I know it. It's not a dream. I know it because I sat, and that is the tragedy. Last week, in the same room, I called to my room, Tzipi Livni and Elet Shoked together. No, and 2 journalists, please don't do it. And we sit together in my room, and let's talk together. 3 people, that's all.
Ayelet Shaked, as you know...
And she said, in the next Knesset...
Who said, Ayelet?
Yes,
Yes,
we
but
will change.
Ayelet, as you know, Ayelet Shaked and Yariv Levin had introduced...
Zev Elkin, not Yariv Levin.
No.
He is before the scoop. Let him say it.
No.
No.
That's all.
And Yariv Levin had introduced a version of the law which I think would have been quite acceptable to even to people
I
who
have it
opposed
here.
it.
They send me this.
So I'm not sure she's the
So
problem.
first of all, I'm sure that I think, Ariel, that this law it's opportunity to celebrate, to do something. You know, you can't do this law with so many angry. And for me, it's tragedy, you know, the way how to celebrate a nation laws. That's of one way, okay?
Was it possible?
Yes.
Shai, I'm really asking you.
Yes.
Was it possible to pass this law
Yes.
by a consensus?
Yes.
And it wasn't attacked by Livni,
with
by
2
Lapid, and
words,
so
only
on?
only two words. Judaism and democracy, and citizen equal. Not equal, citizen equal.
Okay. Maybe yes, maybe I don't
Okay?
know.
Only 2
Again,
words.
I-
2
I-
words.
I don't know. I'm not really. I'm not
No,
a
but
Knesset
let him-
member.
Hey,
I
I'm
don't know.
American,
talk.
please.
Let him talk.
Okay.
Okay. So
Thank
first
you.
of all, 2 words. Only 2 words. Only 2 words. But listen, I'm an Orthodox. I have a lot of problems with the philosophic problems with the reforms or conservative. But I don't fear from them. And I think that if they want to build communities in Israel, for me, it's not a problem. We discuss together, we learn together, we sit in the same table together. And you know, it's...
And what if they don't?
It's free marketing.
No, I mean, is that their way
Why
to
not?
achieve recognition? They have to come to Israel? Is that the...
No. You know what? Not about reform and about secular in Shabbat in Israel. Okay? I think that the problem is that we not discuss together about the questions. They all the time come with power. All the time power. Because I know that Ariel say the truth. All this law came not before Netanyahu or Shaked believe that's the word. They want to push Aaron Barak out from the consensus in Israel. They're afraid from the Supreme Court. That's the truth. Everyone in Israel afraid from everybody. Nobody say what he believe. We all the time think about the other tribe, not about our tribe. So, in the last Knesset, it was a wonderful opportunity because it was a situation between Yesh Atid and Beit Yehudi that I was the people who make this mix together. And my belief was to build a new generation with new vision, how secular and religious sit together in the same coalition and think about Israel. About Israel, not about our tribe, about Israel. And it canceled. That's the truth, it canceled.
Okay.
Dan, I have been thinking recently, which is weird.
It's very important. It's canceled because the two side was Yesh Atid.
Two sides.
Two sides, not only because one side.
Dan, I've been thinking about Jacob Blaustein. Jacob Blaustein, I don't know if you are aware, he was the leader of the American Jewish Committee when Israel was established, and he had a very famous and long-running feud with David Ben-Gurion, mainly stemming from the fact that Ben-Gurion repeatedly said that we expect American Jews to come to Israel, and at one point he even said that we expect American Jews to come to Israel and fight on behalf of Israel. And they reached an agreement, which is an historic agreement in 1950, in which Ben-Gurion supposedly agreed that Israel has no hold on American Jews, that American Jews are only loyal to the American government, and that they are independent entities. And Blaustein had a famous speech in which he said that Israel feels that it is the home of that its main purpose in life is to serve as a place of refuge for Jews that are persecuted and need a place to go. And he said American Jews don't want to go anywhere, and they are an independent entity, and Israel should appreciate that. And when you read his speech, it could have been made yesterday. So now at the end of this long question, are we now in the process of is the relationship between Israel and American Jews, which I think we can probably say the modern version started in 1967, are we now in the middle of an earthquake where things have to be redefined?
It certainly does require the kind of attention it's getting at this conference, and some of the people on the previous panel, Gil Troy and Natan Sharansky have been involved. Of course, Yossi spoke about it as well, looking for a new mechanism for American Jews and Israel to talk about the issues that are of common importance to both of them, but in different proportion, and because some live there and some live here, and so forth. And there are those issues that cross clearly lines, such as those that touch on the Jewish identity or the status in Israel as Jews of non-Israeli Jews. And then there are other issues that go more towards security matters, which anybody can have an opinion about, but one really has to respect the rights of citizens in a democracy to make those decisions about their future, and it's maybe more of a consultative type of relationship. I think all of those are necessary, but needs to take place in the context and with a full knowledge an awareness of the demographic shifts that are underway in both countries. Israel does trend toward a more religious country, toward a more conservative-leaning country. It's not inexorable and it's not massive. The Knesset, frankly, has remained divided in relative proportion over the last few elections, a little bit lefter, a little bit righter, and sometimes the government goes the other way. But that's a general shift or trend and drift in Israeli society, whereas I think the American demographics are very clear, and the Jewish community is part of this, but it's becoming a much more diverse, much more multicultural country. It is Trump notwithstanding, it is tipping in a left-of-center direction, not always friendly to Israel, by the way. And so we need to be very aware of those trends. As I said, a lot of that responsibility lies on the shoulders of us in the American Jewish community to do the proper education with our youth and with those other populations that they interact with on campuses and elsewhere, so that facts and proper history are at the basis of this conversation. Not that you can never criticize Israeli policy or disagree with it, but that there are certain kinds of criticism and delegitimization that should be out of bounds. But Israel, by the same token, should be aware of that reality and not assume that it can just sort of kind of bludgeon its way or dictate what is the acceptable way of supporting Israel. And understand that there are going to be supportive critics or critical supporters, and that needs to be part of this dialogue as well.
Ariel, I'm taking what Dan said about the liberal nature of the American Jewish community, and I think it's probably getting more liberal. And also, the American Jewish community is a minority, and it has the sensitivities of a minority, whereas the Jews in Israel are a majority, and they have different. So, do you think that the left, let's call them left-leaning aspect of American Jews puts them on a collision course? That for governments such as Netanyahu's, they are the enemy. Their views are the enemy, not them personally. And that therefore there is no, and when there's hyper-polarization, as we see all over the world, and in Israel and in America, by necessity, the two sides are growing apart, and there's nothing that can stop that.
Well, just 3 comments, short answers.
And we don't have
questions.
much time.
Yeah, I see the watch. First of all, why is democracy and the equality wasn't in the law? I wasn't there. I know what Avi Dichter, who pushed for the law, what he's saying. He said those principles were guaranteed in different laws and different decisions by the High Court, and that's the reason it wasn't inside the current nation bill. Whether it's a good answer or not, it's for you to decide. I don't know. That's his answer. Netanyahu, never ever I heard from him any clue that see Jews who disagree with him as enemy. Never ever.
No, I didn't say that he said that, but
okay.
that is the attitude of many members of his coalition.
Not as enemy.
As an enemy, just like leftists in Israel are the enemy.
No, no and no. Moreover, the current government, and I so appreciate and so support it. I mean, in some way, it's absurd. Netanyahu, and by the way, led by Naftali Bennett, the current government is a former government by Netanyahu, and I said with Bennett, were the first governments to invest, to put money in Jewish education here in the US for the first time. Second after you? Okay, okay. Still history. And yet, they are criticized as one who are pushing for divorce or for tearing up. Now, I do think you mentioned Trump in one word. Again, I think a lot of what's going on, as I said, is politicized. We inject political disagreements, as was mentioned here before. In general, the Israeli public, let's say, quite sympathetic with this Trump policy, okay? While I know most Jews voted for the Democratic Party, of course it's completely legitimate, and don't like Trump, okay? But we must not to put those disagreements into the discussion, because and for me really, and although I said what I said before, for me, and I believe for the majority of the people of Israel, we are a small people. After the Shoah, we are still not back to the numbers of 18 million Jews as we were before. We have many enemies, and we don't have the luxury for divorce, okay? Now, we have a lot of disagreements, and we won't solve it here in this conference and not in any other conference. But we must accept one each other as is. Now, it would be very easy for me, Shay, now to reply what you said about the reform and so on, because I'm Orthodox. So it would be very easy for me to attack and criticize and so on. I'm not doing it, I will not do it. Why? Because for me, the main point is to find a way, and we are losing time, but to find a way to live together, and live together means also some live here and some are living there, because we have no other option.
Shay, I'm going to cut
and
you
in that
short.
way, respect one each other.
Shay, you have 1 minute.
Thank you. It was wonderful to be here. All right.
I just want to end. I am.
I have 1 minute, and you ask questions, half a minute.
No,
Yes.
I'm not asking
So
a question. If you have, I, unlike Dan, am quite pessimistic about the future relations between Israel and American Jews.
I'm a Cubs fan, so.
But you know, there's a saying: "Evil triumphs when good men do nothing." And so, at least the people who came to this conference are trying to do something about it. And as I was looking up this quote, because I always look up quotes to see that, you know, where they came from. So this is a quote that is ascribed to the Irish political theorist Edmund Burke. John Kennedy used the line and he ascribed it to Edmund Burke. But in fact, Edmund Burke didn't exactly say this famous saying. And I found out that the first place where somebody said for evil to triumph, what good men, or it happens when good men do nothing, was actually said in a anti-prohibition speech in San Jose, California. Thank you very much.